Hello there. You are someone and I am someone else. I'm the dermatomaniac. Why did I say I'm someone else? I am the dermatomaniac. You happen to be my audience. You are somebody else, or, someone watching this. Anyway, that's besides the point, right? Um, yeah, I continually work all the time as a warehouse worker. But, before I get into that, I don't know. I want to talk about something very strange, like a culture. Um, People might call it the white culture, or the English culture would be the North English culture would be the more Pacific culture. Um, there were three main cultures when the United States was first colonized. It was three main cultures of England that came over. The South was mainly very hierarchical, but also very arrogant would probably not be the word, but very very short tempered. It would take very easily for them to lose the temper. Even the hierarchy itself was very short tempered. That's the South English culture, which of course it also colonized the south of the United States. The middle colonies were colonized by what's sort of in between Wales and England, near Cornwall a little bit. So the middle colonies, or what we call the middle states, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, maybe to some extent Maryland, Northern Maryland, and Delaware, New York. Those states, they had this very against hierarchy sort of thinking. They were anti-slavery, not as anti-slavery as the North, but the northern colonies, or the northern states. But they had this way of thinking about everyone should be free from hierarchy. The North was way more hierarchical, but they also were way more anti-slavery than the middle. Now, I would argue, though, that the North way of thinking, the hierarchy part is still around, yeah? It's pretty obvious to me that's influenced most of the United States culture. However, the responsibility of the hierarchy and the tradition of the hierarchy is going away. And as the birth rate collapses for that certain group of people, North and the North colonies, or what we call the northern states, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, those states in particular, and then they also influenced California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska. Like, those states have been heavily influenced by the northeast coast. New Mexico is another great example that's been influenced by. Arizona is kind of interesting because it's kind of in between the South states and the North states. And then Nevada, I feel like you could argue Nevada is more influenced by the middle states. I know with Ohio it's split up into thirds. So you actually have all three cultures in one state, which is very interesting. But anyway, that's besides the point. I feel like the culture of the middle states, with the get rid of hierarchy, they want to reduce hierarchy as much as they can, have their own sects and own religions. It's pretty much over for those guys, the middle influence of the country. And I am actually a descendant of the middle colonists, or the middle statesians, or whatever you call them. The middle United States people that influence the United States. The South, I have no relation to them that much at all. The North, I went to high school in the North. I got to see the hierarchy up close and personal. I got to see how people thought about hierarchy, and how they don't respect it, but they use it to their advantage. And so I feel like the culture of respecting hierarchy is gone now, and the less and less respect there is for the hierarchy, the more and more extortion there'll be. And I think that's what's going to happen in the United States. I think the tradition of constitutional law it's over. Constitutional hierarchy is over. We don't even follow the 17 enumerated powers in the articles anymore in the Constitution. We don't even follow the first article in the Constitution. It's clear to me that we wrote a bunch of stuff on paper that didn't follow through with any of it. I mean, the 1 in 30,000 rule, nobody's used it in the past 200 years, pretty much. Like, that, to me, this tells me that there is the Constitution's not really that much of a rule that people follow. Nobody cares about it. And so, if we write stuff down, we constantly contradict the things we write down. And what about banking contracts? What about little contracts? We're talking about, government. We're already violating multiple sects of the government in terms of multiple of the articles of the Constitution. What about when you sign into your bank? When you sign that bank account, are you violating a part of the contract that maybe you read but you don't care? Or did the bank violate a part of the contract that they don't care about? All the banks do it all the time. FTX is not really a bank, but that's a perfect example of a bank that did it. Wells Fargo is another great example. They violated the contract. They secretly signed you up for all these accounts. Wells Fargo. So, yeah. I think hierarchy is normal. I think that people who reject hierarchy and use hierarchy to get rid of other hierarchies don't realize what the damage they're doing. I would call them, they're called Democrats, but whatever you call them, modern liberals or progressives, they're progressing towards the ideal of getting rid of all hierarchy. That's the ideal of progressivism anyway, is that you get rid of all hierarchy, police, state, whatever, right? But in order to do that, you kind of need the police, you kind of need the state. And so they believe that instead of the corporations working for the government, it should be the people that the government should work for, or whatever, right? Now, the thing is, the problem with these liberals, they don't understand this. This is the biggest problem with liberals. And they don't understand that the corporations are getting 8% of the tax revenue, and the individual, like the poor people and the welfare recipients, are getting 16% of the tax revenue. So both groups are being bailed out. The middle class doesn't seem to be getting any of the tax revenue unless they work for the government, like my parents did. So depending on what's going on, the middle class, for the most part, unless they're working for the government, they're not being bailed out. And again, the government, like military, arguably that's pretty efficient in some regard, not always, but there's deficiencies in the central hierarchy. I will give them that. Not entirely. There's definitely capital loss. That's like any big business, especially when it comes to government. And in fact, it's even more to an extreme for government. Monarchs don't seem to have as much capital loss, surprisingly. Like monarchs that are hereditary, I'd say have the least amount of what do you call it? Capital loss. In the capital loss theory, basically, you don't have an incentive to pass down to your heirs or whatever, and you don't really have an incentive to make it more efficient. If you're a big business and you've already swallowed up all the small businesses, technically, this is what Democrats and liberals believe, that you've made the whole thing inefficient. But they don't believe this for public schools and police and fire department. I do believe that it does exist for those things. That's the difference between me and a Democrat, is that I still believe that public schools have huge amounts of capital loss, huge amounts. And people are like, we need to bail out the schools again because they ran out, the teachers don't have enough money to make their rent. The problem is, you bail out the schools, guess what? Rent goes up anyway. You're just throwing money at a problem, guess what? The rent is going to get readjusted for all the money you just threw at it. So there's clearly, and then if you put price controls on the rent, guess what? There's no improvement on rental properties. So there's no fixing it. Hierarchy it is an integral part of nature itself. You cannot, even if you use government force, you're creating a bigger hierarchy, decentralized, instead of multiple hierarchies, multiple big businesses, or even multiple small businesses fighting over power and land. And so that's the problem, is these liberals, same thing, trade unions, violent trade unionism has historically been one of the worst ideologies in all of history. Think about the Nazis. They had violent trade unions. The fascists in Italy, they had violent trade unions. In fact, that was pretty much the definition, is bundle of sticks, violent trade unions. That is the idea of the military and the jobs collectivized, put together into the government. No one's allowed to secretly have sex. They're all fused into the state. They control the bedrooms of the state. Like that's a pretty normal thing when it comes to violent trade unions. Trade unions are also very hierarchical. You look at teachers, they say, why do I have to pay teacher union dues? I can barely afford rent. And, it's to support the union. It's like, yeah, but this union doesn't represent me because clearly I want a higher pay, and guess what? I still pay the union, don't really get that much high of a pay, and the person that everyone else is elected, I don't agree with. Like, that's the thing. Democracy can be inherently hierarchical if you can't opt out for a certain tax or a certain thing. But rights are very, very important. Compared to democracy, rights should be over democracy. I hate when people say we must support democracy, but then they don't really go into detail on what that entails. Does that entail that we could just vote for one person? Let's say he hasn't really been in a court of trial or whatever. We just decide to put an exos law on him saying, we banish him. All collectively as a society, we banish him. Do you think we should all do that? Do you think that we should vote for, let's just say, for instance, that let's say there's 300 million people, which there are in this country, and there's one woman, and we vote all the gangbanger. Do you think that's democracy? Do you think it's fair? Do you think the right to our body is more important than the right to vote the gangbanger? The 300 million of us gangbanging one woman? That's the problem with democracy. It's the problem with hierarchy. Like, democracy and hierarchy are interlaced. You cannot have one or the other. You have to have both. And so, monarchs, same thing. They're inherently hierarchical, although I do think they can be more fair in some instances because they have the incentive structure of inheritance. And I think that's the greatest thing about our society. That culture of inheritance is, like I said, the northern culture actually practiced inheritance to a much bigger extent than the other two cultures, the middle colonies and the southern colonies. Southern colonies practiced inheritance to giving other people no property rights whatsoever, which were sadly the black people or what we call African Americans, whatever they are, right? It's very sad. Sadly, they didn't get the property rights that all the three group cultures had. And so although now with the northern culture rejecting the ideal of property rights and believing that if they get rid of property rights and inheritance, that they will inherently create a more democratic process or a more decentralized process, it's not going to work out. You're probably just going to create a bigger central hierarchy. And you could create violent trade unionism like the Nazis, the fascists, and the Soviets. The Soviets had 135 trade unions, if I'm not mistaken, throughout their 15 republics. The Nazis had about, I think, 13 to 9. I don't remember. Same with I know the fascists and the Nazis have about the same amount. They had about 13 to 9 in both those countries. Depending on how you count it and stuff. Arguably, like, there was a bowling league that was technically a union, but that's like, they had like National Socialist Bowling League, National Socialist this, National Socialist that. So, it's clear to me that the culture that we once cherished, it's fading away because the birth rate is collapsing. And because we don't know how to solve this, we use this vague word democracy to fix everything, that we will never solve it because we're too busy not even really looking at the definition of words. You can use words to abuse people, and it's kind of sad, but that's sort of the way life is. And in some ways, it really stabilizes the hierarchy, so maybe it's a good thing. But I just want people to really think about things, in a way, some ways. I was told by one person that I'm related to that Boeing and the trains are not regulated. I looked up. There's 3 regulatory agencies for the trains and for Boeing, the airplane manufacturer. Right? So they were wrong. Standard Oil was a monopoly. I looked up. They only controlled 80% of the market share, and though they did have some influence on the market, a lot of influence on the market, the smaller competitors were always competing with Standard Oil and always threatening their market share. And Standard Oil was broken up, and guess what? When Standard Oil broke up, the capital loss theory, like I said, once you break up a business, sometimes, not always, sometimes because the government did enforce it, so it may have made the market more efficient. But because that's a good video on why someone's against antitrust. I think people should watch that video. But I didn't make it, but somebody else did. It's called The Academic Agent: Why I'm Against Antitrust. That's a very good video. But anyway, that actually helped the market when it got, because then Rockefeller actually became way wealthier because he owned stock in all these different companies. So the capital loss theory, it was surprising, because at the beginning of Standard Oil's life, they actually got barrels of oil $2 down to 20 cents, right? And then the barrels of oil went up because they could consume more and more businesses, and they didn't really have much of an incentive to make it more efficient anymore, because they controlled a large amount of the pipelines. They used to use trains, but now they use pipelines or whatever. And then they broke it up again. They got Standard Oil of New Jersey, Standard Oil of whatever, right? Different oil companies. Exxon probably is a descendant of Standard Oil, like, basically. But now, guess what? Oil is, well, it's adjusted for inflation. We're about half of what Standard Oil got it down to, what, 20 cents a barrel. Now it's about 40 cents a barrel. So Standard Oil improved the market tremendously with what they were able to do. They were able to make a technology to make oil way more efficient to process. And without that, we would not have the economy we have today. It's incredible. Now, do I think that there could be climate change involved with that? Sure, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. There's 3% of climate scientists saying that it might not be caused by the carbon from the oil. It might be caused by something else, something more natural. I'm on the fence with that. I think maybe there is maybe global warming or global whatever melting of the ice caps. I know the northern hemisphere has been warmer lately. The global warming of at least the northern hemisphere I believe it's more of a natural phenomenon what people make it out to be. I think it generally is. It might be human activity, but it might be just natural. I think because we've had 5 ice ages before the last one we had, right? So what's to say that it's us doing it, or what's to say it's something else doing it? You know? What if there's something else besides carbon? Because carbon only makes less than 1% of the air. It doesn't make up that much of the air, I don't think. There's a video that goes into detail on how much more carbon there is in the air, and it's really not that much. Don't think it's carbon, and I don't think it's loss of ozone, because the ozone's been pretty much repaired since the 1990s. So I don't know what it is. But whatever is causing this warming of at least the northern hemisphere, I wouldn't say it's global because I live only in the northern hemisphere. I don't know anything about the southern hemisphere. I think Antarctica is actually growing in ice, but the northern hemisphere is melting in ice. Right? Whatever is causing this, it might not be human activity. And I think people need to really think about that. And if we can't stop it, right? Let's say it's not us that's doing it. And let's say it's just happening and it's going to cause us to go out and die anyway. I mean, maybe we should try our best to stop it, but what's the point, you know? If it's a natural phenomenon, how can you fix something that naturally ingrained into the planet? Because us burning coal, maybe let's just hypothetically say, but us burning coal causes heating of the earth, right? Let's just say this. I think 95% of scientists say that 95% of climate scientists say this, right? That the coal. Now, there were volcanoes and stuff before us that did that same exact process where the coal it would probably heat up the coals in the earth, and guess what? Global heating on the Earth's surface, because the coals got destroyed by the volcanoes, got heated up by the volcanoes. So I think that could be volcanic activity. If it is, I mean, it is pretty. I mean, this summer was super hot. I do think that we are getting warmer. I don't know to what extent we're going to get warmer next year or the year after. I don't think it's the end of the world. I think I will live well into my 70s, and if I take good care of myself, maybe my 80s and 90s. My alleles are only going to last 600 years, though, so I don't think I'm going to make it past 600 years. Most people's alleles aren't that big. And so, yeah. But anyway, that's besides the point. You are someone, I am someone else, talking about the different cultures and the flaws of hierarchy, and what really causes hierarchy to. The solution to getting rid of hierarchy, I think, is that's going to cause a more central hierarchy. I generally do believe that. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right. You put your thoughts down in the comments, I guess.